Here's a question. What do Shadow the Hedgehog, Knuckles Chaotix, and Tails Skypatrol all have in common? Well, they all aren't very good, but they're all also Sonic games that don't feature Sonic as the main character. Sega announced back in April that 2024 was the year of Shadow. This year would feature a ton of Shadow the Hedgehog related content, like a remaster of Sonic Generations with a new Shadow campaign, a new LEGO Shadow set, and a real-life version of Dark Rider, the motorcycle that Shadow used in his titular 2005 game, Shadow the Hedgehog. Wouldn't it be crazy if they announced a Shadow the Hedgehog remaster? Speaking of that game, do you know it's been over 18 years since that game came out? And that game was the last major Sonic game that was about a character other than Sonic. For many years, the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise incorporated several different playable characters into the 3D Sonic games, and often these characters would have drastically different gameplay styles. In Sonic Adventure back in 1998, you had the regular Sonic stages with high-speed platforming, but then you also had 5 other campaigns, one of which had third-person shooter stages as the robot E-102 Gamma, and they even had fishing stages as Big the Cat. This led to many of the early 3D Sonic games lacking focus, eventually culminating in the disaster that was Sonic 06. Sonic 06 had a notoriously rushed development, and this is just my personal opinion, but I feel like if Sonic Team had just focused on making one solid campaign instead of 3 separate storylines filled with different playable characters and gameplay elements, Sonic 06 would have turned out as a much better game even with the same amount of development time. I think even Sega and Sonic Team began to realize the character issues because with the next mainline game in the series, Sonic Unleashed, they stripped the cast down significantly, with Sonic being the only playable character, and the only other previously introduced Sonic characters making a reappearance being Eggman, Tails, and Amy. And since Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Team has been very careful to keep the roster of characters quite limited. There was Sonic Generations, which did bring back a lot of the old characters, but that was an anniversary game meant to celebrate the series, and besides, not only did the side characters not play a big role in that game, but Sonic was still the only playable character. I think reining things in a bit was a smart choice, and I honestly didn't really care to see many of these side characters. But then I played a little game called The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. This game was released as an April Fool's gag last year in 2023, and I went into it not really knowing what to expect. To briefly go over the game, it's a detective visual novel where you play as an employee on a train called the Mirage Express. It's Amy's birthday and the theme is a murder mystery party. Sonic is assigned the role of victim in the game, meaning it's up to you, Tails, and Amy to figure out who quote-unquote killed Sonic. This game was a really interesting change of pace for the franchise, because the gameplay is completely different, although they do throw in these little mini games that show up when your character is thinking to at least somewhat tie the game back to more traditional Sonic gameplay. Maybe they included these mini games as palate cleansers to break up the gameplay, but to me, it just seems like either they wanted to pad out the game to make it last longer, or they weren't confident enough in the detective part of the game to let it exist on its own. This is a problem that the Danganronpa series has. They have a bunch of random minigames in the trials. Why do I have to play DDR and SSX Tricky to figure out who murdered my best friend? But for the most part, the minigame in The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog is fine, although it does actually get a little challenging towards the end. But putting the minigame aside, the core of this game is the visual novel / point-and-click adventure portion, where you're discovering clues, interrogating witnesses, and calling people out on their lies. However, I think the heart of this game is the cast of characters. You're not just catching some random person in a lie, you're catching the non-chuckler himself, Knuckles the Echidna. You're discovering clues while Amy is having a morbidly great time. You're interrogating witnesses with your buddy Tails at your side. This game reminded me how much I really liked the Sonic cast. And the fact that Sonic wasn't there for most of the game because he was, well, dead, it gave the other characters a chance to shine in a way that felt natural. I guess I realized from playing this game that I really wouldn't mind Sega experimenting with different genres as long as they're not tacked on. Make them their own games starring the other characters and design them with care. I wouldn't mind the treasure hunting Knuckles stages from Sonic Adventure made into a full-on collectathon game. There's plenty of games to draw inspiration from, like Mario Odyssey. Making a good treasure hunting game is definitely possible. The most important part of an exploration-based platformer like this is the controls, and I think Knuckles has a really cool moveset with his gliding, diving, and wall climbing. While I don't really care much for the treasure hunting stages in the adventure games, I've always liked the way that Knuckles and Rouge controlled. It's just the level design and the camera that needs improvement. Oh, and make sure the game uses the Adventure 1 radar where you can see more than one emerald shard at a time and not the Adventure 2 one. Here's another idea. I wouldn't mind another Amy-themed visual novel like The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Honestly, I'd be okay if they went away from the Phoenix Wright style murder mystery stuff and tackled another genre of visual novel. Maybe something horror related. Sonic has never shied away from having spooky aesthetics, from Sandopolis to Pumpkin Hill to Hang Castle. Heck, they even made a whole horror short movie for Sonic Unleashed. While we're talking about horror, could you imagine an Amy survival horror game? Back in Sonic Adventure 1, Amy's levels had her running away from the robot Zero. I don't think a survival horror game is too far-fetched. Remember Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine? That was a fun one, even if it was just a reskin of Puyo Puyo. I still think the fact that the game used elements from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon gave it its own unique charm. Sonic Team even developed some of the Puyo Puyo games themselves, so it's not too crazy to think that we could get another Eggman-focused puzzle game. Heck, I wouldn't mind if they gave Shadow the Hedgehog another shot. Better controls, more interesting level aesthetics, and allowing you to start playthroughs from already completed stages would have done wonders for this game. As much as I and other people dunk on the 2005 Shadow the Hedgehog game, I legitimately think it's one of the most ambitious Sonic games ever made. Shooting, vehicles, morality system, branching paths, multiple endings, it had a lot of potential. I think a lot of the spin-offs focused on the other characters that we've seen, while not great, were at the very least interesting and could end up being great games if they were improved upon. Also, I should say, I'm not asking for Sega to make full 100+ hour $60 games, nor do I want them to. These should be smaller, budget titles. These games should never take away from the core Sonic Team Sonic games. These spin-offs should be just that, spin-offs. Smaller games made by Sonic Team during the downtime between big new Sonic releases, or games made by completely different development teams altogether. We've seen other developers take the reins of Sonic and make some actually great stuff like Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform, Sonic Mania, and of course the Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Like I mentioned before, this is the year of Shadow, but not only that, there was also that Knuckles show that came out this year on Paramount. It seems like lately Sega has been more open to experimenting with some of the other Sonic characters, so who knows, we may see another non-Sonic Sonic game in the future. But hey, that's about all I have to say for today. So, thanks for watching y'all, and have a great rest of your day.